Debra, what inspired you to create this book?
It was a project that came up behind an earlier project where I just finished photographing in Coyoacan, Mexico, where I had been photographing the home of Trotsky and Frida Kahlo. And it was a period of 3 years where I had to work with a lot of federales and machine-gunned guards watching me while I was working. And when I was finished, I needed to come home. And I really felt the need to take myself into the landscape and not get on an airplane and find where I wanted to work, where I would feel completely free and comfortable. So I headed east and came up through Sedona and Oak Creek and Hopi around sunset, and I was fortunate enough for the timing. I sort of just saw something I'd never seen before, and the earth just sort of opened up to me, and I said, I kept going back for 3 to 4 times a year for 10 years.
Yeah, it was, when you look at these and look in the back of the book, you actually have stories about some of these photographs, and it becomes very apparent that this is something that you've been working on for a number of years. One of the things that intrigues me about collections like this is how I know that these are not the only photographs you took.
You mean in that time period?
In that time period, or they're not even all of the photographs that you took when you went to Rancho de Taos. How do you select what you want to share in a book?
Well, when I was doing the work, there was no idea of a book. I was doing the work for 10 years and actually only doing this work for 10 years. With no idea of what was at the end of my road or what was it going to be. It was just a project where I was drawn to the land to work and just kept working. And I actually kept a map on my trips and would highlight the patterns of my driving in the roads. I went down over to Hovenweep or Hopi or Zuni or Chaco or wherever I was traveling, and realized that when I first started, I was working in the national parks. Those were the most obvious, like the surface of a water. And then through the project, I realized that I was driving off mile marker 34 down a dusty road. And that's where I stopped the car, and that's where I stayed, because there was no one around except me and a few crows, and rattlesnakes, I suppose, which I have way too many rattlesnake stories. When I, 8 years into the project, had to take some time off. I had a sister who was very ill and spent time with her. When I went back into the project, I finished it out, and I knew the project had closure on one particular image that I did, which was the cross. And it was the only time I felt physically threatened in the landscape. And I also had felt like I had brought together the beginning image, which was Rancho de Taos, which was the first image I took on sort of that journey of trying to plant myself and figure out what I wanted to work on, which was the church. And ironically, the last photograph in the book was the cross. And I felt like I married somehow the landscapes into the church with that last image, and I couldn't possibly think of what I could do after that, so the project was done. I knew that.
You have, in this collection, you have a wonderful selection of absolutely stunning landscapes, but there are also some very intimate portraits of the interiors of churches, and I was very intrigued by this juxtaposition of the very small and the very intimate and the incredible openness of that countryside.
After my sister got ill, when I went back into the landscapes, I had actually taken a day off from working, because when I work I get up early in the morning and I'm like a doctor on call. I mean, my eyes are on wide open and I'm working all day long, traveling through the landscape, and sometimes where I find where I want to be situated, I'll sit there maybe 3-4 hours waiting until I feel I want to work with the land. When I'm finished with my day of working, I'm really tired, so I took some time off. So here I thought, well, I should do something that's rather enriching me about the region I'm in. And there were these wonderful 7 churches that were settled through the church in Spain, Catholicism in New Mexico, north of and including of Chimayo. So I went into Las Trampas, and my sister had very strong faith in God, and I walked into the church, and Bonnie had died recently to this visit to the church. So when I was in the church, I lit a candle for her and sat there, and I was the only person in the church, and sitting there quietly looking around, and when I was done I left, and I started driving down the road, and as I was driving down the road I started crying, and I started crying so hard I couldn't see the roads. Obviously I pulled over, and then I realized there's something terribly wrong. The further I go from the church, the more intensely I'm crying. So I have to go back to the church to figure out what happened to me in there, which is what I did. So I went back, and I didn't leave for 2 years. And I did nothing but work in those churches for 2 years. And I was really accepted by the priest and Father Roca in Chimayo, who I brought a few proofs to and showed them to him because I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable what I was doing. And he looked at me and just said, "Follow your path, you're fine." And I just went, "Thank you." And he really opened up the villages to me. He gave me the phone numbers of all the wonderful people in Chimayo who their responsibility is to tend to the churches, and these are national treasures, and so they're locked up. You can't just walk up or drive up to the churches and get in. So they ended up coming together in my studio. I put the churches on one wall, and I put the landscapes way on the other side, and as I kept looking at them, I kept wanting to put them. I liked the way this looks with this one, and I love the way I would see relationships both formally in the construction of the photograph and in the content. And then very soon after, I realized there was a similarity. It was the same for me being in the church as in the landscape. They both resonated with the same sense of spirituality.
Well, I wish we had more time to talk about this. I would really enjoy it very much, but I want to thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you very much.